2668, Private Kurt J., en route to Celian Theater. After a brief reprieve after training, they, along with the entirety of fresh-blooded recruits, were gathered in a large atrium. It was similar in construction to the smaller classroom and designed for larger crowds. When they found their seats, the rest required to attend filled the room until every seat was occupied. Seeing the room mostly filled, Sergeant Faith then stood at a podium, off-center of the main projector, and began his briefing. The room darkened, and only the glow from the holo projector could be seen, until ultimately coming to life with graphics of their intended targets and ships that orbited an unfamiliar planet, Celia, as well as the rest of the system. As you all know, we are currently at war, and the time to face our enemy is near. Already on the front lines, the Navy has engaged the enemy and pushed them back to their planet. They are prepared to fight tooth and nail for its security, but that is where we come in. The scene changed to a collection of ships of Terran design, battling in the outer planets of the system. Right now, we engage them on their outer planets, namely Belladere and Dorn. From there, they plan to wait and sweep for enemy contacts in the Tila asteroid belt. From there, we will link up with our home base, the TRSC arm of Sol, and where you will each report to your respective commands. Now, he said, before switching the view to the planet of concern, all you need to know is that our plan is to take the capital city, Artray, and assist with Raptor Company in their mission to capture the Celian command. Be prepared for a hot drop because the area is sure to be swarming with enemy contacts to the north and the east. That is where we'll insert and raise hell for them to advance. The mission description seems watered down, but Jay knew it was only to give them a broad idea of what they were going to get into, with the details to be delivered when they were actually with their commands. The rest of the briefing went as usual, regurgitating enemy organizations and structure, something he was now fairly familiar with. He knew the enemy to be donned in black and gray armor, much like them, but had amber-colored visors. The overall shape of the armor was different, and the sashes they wore added to their design. He did well to study up on them, as their likeness grew the more he remembered seeing them early at the start of the war. He was just ignorant of them until now, but he was going to have his chance at retribution. After the briefing, Jay, Cameron, Fields, and Spears met for their final meal aboard the transport ship. It was to be their final reprieve of normalcy before their encounter with the enemy. "Say, what should we call him?" sounded Fields, and he took a large bite out of his poorly made and plain-tasting food. "I heard some of the guys who are supplementing Viper came up with a name for him." "Oh?" Cameron perked up to the query. "Besides Celen? I don't know anything that you'd call them that can be derogatory." Fields waved his fork to the sides in a snide motion, denying Cam's rebuke. "You saw the holograms. With their helmet off, they got those long ears, see? Well, I think we should start calling them knife ears," he said confidently. "That's—" Cameron was the first to begin, but was interjected by Spears, who sat quietly until now. "It's stupid. There's no need to attach a name to them. If it makes you feel better, go ahead," Spears replied as he returned to his food and began reading off his personal datapad and going over fire team formations and tactics, ignoring Fields, who then turned to Jay for his input. "What do you say, Jay? I think it's fitting," he said confidently, confident that Jay would agree. "It doesn't roll off the tongue. Come up with something better next time," he replied, earning a gaze from Cam. "What? I just said it doesn't roll off the tongue. Besides, it doesn't matter what we call them, just as long as we win this war." It had already been a year and a half since their first encounter with the Celians, and they had already pushed far into their territory, capturing several planets and leaving it to the orbital guard and troopers to garrison them. "All right, fine. I won't force you guys to use it, but I'm sure it'll ring when we finally drop," said Fields, who garnered a distant "hell yeah" from a raider a couple of tables away. They were in compliance with their mission, and Jay dwelled on the subject silently as their surroundings grew loud with the addition of the new slang. Now finished with his food, Jay departed, with Cam behind him. Instead of going to bed, he left for his usual seat in their room that gave him a view of space. Instead of stars and nebulas, only a familiar swirl enveloped the ship. They were in slip space and en route to their destination, Celia. He was quiet for the most part, and Cameron sat quiet as he began to read. When some time had passed, Cameron spoke to a listless Jay, who only stared into the portal. "Do you think we're ready, for war?" Jay turned to Cameron, who had a look of fear and anxiousness upon him. He replied to comfort his friend. "No one's really ready until it happens. You just have to get ready to adapt. I know I did," he said. He thought of the words himself, speaking them from experience. When he looked at his brother in arms before him, he finally remembered that he was older, by nearly 5 years or so. But due to their rank, he saw a young man who was fresh out of academy that was now his peer. In the end, he didn't see age, but rank. It came as a shock to him when he first learned that Sergeant Faith was his own age, with a blood stripe of his own with the experience to match. It was jarring that raiders younger than him have seen combat before he had even thought to join, but he saw that they wallowed in it. To be a raider was a lifestyle, and few thought of leaving the organization, for they believed that only torment would await them. He had heard stories of raiders who decided to come home after a large operation, but it wouldn't last long with reports of them taking their lives shortly after leaving the service. But that was their risk as part of the TRSC. They would leave families behind for months, or even years at a time, hardly growing old because of cryogenics. Those who returned would sometimes come home to nothing, or their partners had moved on. It was a grim reality, but that was the life they lived. As such, it became common for relationships to form with service members aboard a vessel, with marital policies still in effect to punish infidelity. Having lived it for a short while, it was a culture shock to say the least. "Hey Cam," he said quietly. "Do you have anyone back home? A girl? A boy?" Cameron grew flustered at the sudden questioning, since Jay's mind had wandered onto the subject, knowing that this might be his life from now on. In the end, it was curiosity that drove the question. "I did, during my time in academy." He laid his reading material on the table in between them and stared into slip space with Jay. "But when she learned I wanted to join the Raiders, well, she broke up with me, wanted me by her side, and asked her father if I could get a job at his work." "Oh? What did he do?" questioned Jay, his interest piqued. "He owned a small ship manufacturer startup. Bravo Systems, he called it. They made B-grade ship components. You heard of it?" replied Cameron. Jay shook his head in the negative. "First I'm hearing of it, and I dealt with plenty of component manufacturers in my day," replied Jay. Cameron was curious and probed the subject further. "I remember you saying you flew. What did you do before all this?" Jay hesitated a moment, but answered honestly, "I used to be a data runner for a small broker. Started in the middle of the pirate revolution, but I ran independent. Learned to steer clear of the MPR and TRSC alike, but that's all I did since I was old enough to fly. From Alistair Nebula to Alpha Centauri, I ran it all until now." He paused, turning to Cameron, who listened intently. "I used to fly the Herald, a last-gen craft with even later-gen components. It was a miracle I survived in the first place." Cameron then spoke, this time posing a question. "Do you think you'll fly again? It seems like a waste of a skill if you ask me." Jay was caught off guard by the question, but knew deep down that he still loved to fly. He just felt like he wasn't worthy of it. "I don't think I can. Not yet, anyway. After losing Cam, it's been a sour experience to remember. But we'll see." He ended before rising from his seat in preparation for bed. He knew that by the time they wake up, they would need their gear in order for their transfer, so he found it best to prepare himself for what is to come next. "Well, in any case, let's go to bed. Got lots to get ready for. Good night," he said as he left for the showers, then finally to his rack. It took little for him to fall asleep, and in his next breath, he was asleep, and only the calamity of the ship would wake him. When he awoke, it was to the silent clamor of shuffling from the other raiders as they grabbed their gear and moved to the compartment that connected to a docking collar. They had all lined up in rows, as dictated by their sergeant. "Hurry and form up. We have places to be and aliens to kill. Don't leave shit in your racks because that shit will be lost and you won't be able to get it back," he ordered, which caused several others to return for items they may have thought they forgot, making their trips more than it needed to. Jay figured it was due to their rising anxiety of their moment to come. The doors opened, revealing a short hall that was quiet, with the other end open and ready for their reception. Column by column, the fledgling raiders filtered into the collar and entered into the ship opposite of them. Jay walked with his gear, followed by Cam and Fields, with spears leading from the front, and noticed that the corridor was viewless and reinforced with insulation and alloy beams. But as they arrived through the docking tube, They were met by a group of 3 individuals donned in standard raider armor, but were painted with gold. He was an older man, but was still in the height of his prime, and the letters spelled out below his neck were Raiku, with the individual to his left named Jakal, and the person to his right, Chandler. He knew little of them, but knew by their stripes that they led the companies of which they were to be assigned, so to make things easier, they were put in formation and called out by name. "Wasn't there supposed to be 4 company commanders?" whispered Cameron to Jay, who could only reply with a shrug, stating that he didn't know. Instead, a female appeared beside the 3 officers, sporting only red strips upon her shoulders and knee guards. From her angle, he couldn't make out her name, but did overhear her speaking with Raiku. "Is that so, Eau Claire?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Raptor is full, and is on standby for the 2nd phase. We can't risk trying to teach a rookie in that kind of field. I take it Cobra has the room, correct?" she explained. "We have plenty. More so than Viper and Raven combined, I suppose," he replied. "Don't worry. With our numbers, I'm sure we'll be able to nurture a fine batch of bloodied raiders yet." She offered a slight bow before departing when he saw her helmet's visor. Of the 3, they had decorated on their central chest plate with an engraving of their respective company namesakes on the left side of the armor. However, she didn't have one, and instead had noticeable scratches on her visor that created a sinister decor. One with rows of teeth lining the edges of the visor, with a pair of sharp eyes in the center, surrounded by more scratches that created an inversion of empty space. By the time she was gone, there was a large pool of recruits who had yet to be put into either Viper or Raven Company, with their respective commanders at the forefront of their new rookies. This had left them with only one option, and the older officer addressed the masses. "All right, listen up and listen well," he said, as he began pacing between the 3 groups. "I am Major Raiku, Company Commander of Cobra Company, and current battalion commander until we find a replacement. A little bit about me, whom you will be led under. I was born and raised on Alpha Centauri Prime, where I enlisted. Then, after some years of service, I was commissioned prior to the start of the Militia Pirate Revolution. So I have seen it all the worst humanity can do to each other, as well as a lot of the good. And it is my belief that we all have a divine right to live among the stars. But we have been attacked by forces unknown, and who have the misfortune of being your enemy." He looked about the fresh blood who had just transferred from the transport ship that had already left, and continued. "For those of you uninformed, we have been attacked by our first contact race, who call themselves Celians. And instead of a friendly greeting from the stars, their brass decided it was a wonderful idea to invade our newest colonies, from Dima to Draxus and all in between. Those who were not killed were taken as cargo, and may be facing a fate worse than death. We have the intel that most civilian populations have evacuated, and those left are hostile forces. And yes, before you say it, no, we are soldiers, not monsters. We are still citizens of the TRSC, and we will not stoop to their level. For the lot of you, this will be your first combat engagement, one worthy of earning your blood stripes. But you must first prove you are worthy. Now get to your racks after convening with your commanders. Dismissed." Jay had felt sincerity and passion in Raiku's address, and did as he said, convening with the major in the center. He thought it was just another speech, but tailored to those he would lead directly. Instead, he was taking the time to learn the names and interests of his new subordinates. When he approached, he met Raiku's eyes with his own, and knew he was about to speak with a major. "Kurt, is it? I've heard a lot about you. To think the pilot who warned of the attack would join the raiders. I would have thought you would join the Flyboys, since you share similar talents." As per custom and courtesies, he placed himself at parade rest before replying, "Yes, sir, but I felt I could get close and personal with the enemy, sir." "Well, you chose right, since we'll be dropping into the heart of enemy territory. I'm sure you'll get yours, but make sure you keep a level head when in combat, you understand?" replied Raiku. "Yes, sir," replied Jay as he now searched for a new topic, such as the visual intrigued from just moments prior. "Sir, I have a question." "Shoot," he replied in earnest. "That sergeant from before. I noticed she doesn't share an engraving like the other companies do, and I noticed how her visor was designed. Is that legal?" The major had a countenance of wonder upon his face, indicating that the subject had not yet crossed his mind, and shared a look of familiarity. "Only few people are authorized to have marked helmets like those. Sergeant Eau Claire is just one of the very few," Take note, those with that kind of modification are reserved for the most dangerous and experienced, and know that if they lead the charge, you charge alongside them. Jay gave a nod of understanding, knowing that his answer was left unfulfilled, but had decided not to pry. When they were done with introductions, they moved into their new homes, separated by company, and found that Cobra had the largest space of the four. Luckily, he was able to find beds that shared a space with Spears, Cam, and Fields, who were already engaged in conversation by the time he had arrived. "So, what do you think these freaks look like? You think they take the form of a human before eating your brains?" Fields, the first voice he recognized, and noticed the disappointed looks of Spears and Cameron. "First off, we already know what they look like. And second, do you not pay attention to the briefs?" It was Cam who had replied, blatantly berating Fields' speculation. "Hey, I'm just saying, but maybe it's not their real form," he rebuked, clearly trying to add ground to a baseless claim. Spears sighed and replied, "Fields, you fool. We have the biometrics, but if you're still curious, get a kill of your own and find out then. In the meantime, pipe down and finish putting your gear in your locker." By the time he had finished reprimanding Fields, he, along with Cam, had noticed Jay's presence as he began putting his items away, with Cam and Spears relaxing on their beds while they waited for the two to finish. "I saved you a rack below me. I hope you don't mind the bottom," sounded Cam as he leaned over from the frame of his bed, nearly meeting Jay's face. He momentarily grew flustered from how close he was, but quickly got used to it since it had seemed to be a habit of his. "It's fine, and move your face before you kiss a locker door," he said with a smirk, before turning to a more serious topic. "So, you guys ready for our first drop?" he said nonchalantly. "You never know you're ready until you're in combat," answered Spears. "I suggest you all get in the right mindset, especially you, Cam." The person in question shrunk behind the cover of his rack's frame, reminding Jay of what he looks like. "You know what you remind me of, Cam?" he asked, to which he shook his head in a sulking fashion. "Like a cat, the ones with the long fur. Surprises me how lenient they are with hair." "Right?" voiced Fields erratically. "I just got approved for a low-cut mohawk. Pretty sweet, right?" His comment had caught them off guard, ultimately surprised at his supposed authorization, but he had shown them the paperwork which appeared legitimate. "Damn, he's right," said Spears. "Congrats, I guess." Fields had a look of triumph over his peers, but they were quick to dismiss his upcoming new look. They would then continue until their rest period had come, with a simple order to make it on time to the briefing auditorium center of the ship. They were within the final stretch of their first journey into the expanse of the stars.